So any suggestions would be cool. So any suggestions? Cool. Cool. Hey, right, guys. So this is one of our impromptu live streams that we're not taking questions on or not taking questions about housing law. So we're going to be just got a loose agenda of things to talk about that might be of interest to people, just things we've been thinking about recently. Let me just sort out my YouTube back office stuff here. Here we go. Oh, don't do that. Here we go. Yeah, cool. So the title I'm playing around with the title of this. So it's tonight is called "Why Is Homelessness Getting Worse?" In one sense, I don't know what to call this really, because I think it's just us talking about stuff which impressed on us recently, and we've been thinking about around homelessness, and just kind of to enable a bit of chat time to talk about stuff in a bit more detail that we certainly don't have time for on the Thursday live streams. So that's the kind of purpose of it. Hey, right, Michael, nice to have you here, mate. That was quick. I was just saying to the others that I haven't advertised this at all. So yeah, appreciate you going to turn up. That's cool. You can absolutely put questions or kind of comments in the chat about what we're talking about. But as I say, we're not covering the usual stuff we do Thursday. So if you've got a question about housing law or homelessness law, come back tomorrow, basically. Hey, you right, Amanda? So yeah, so just to say, I know there's a lag here, so I know someone just put a question in there, but save it for tomorrow. So we'll do those questions tomorrow. So in terms of what we're talking about tonight, we've got like a loose agenda, and we'll kind of start building up from it. So I think we'll do this one first, which I think is going to be fairly short, and then we'll kind of get into some more meaty stuff. So if you guys can, if anyone actually watched the last one of these we did, which I think was about 6 weeks ago or something, we talked about this thing which I'd seen on LinkedIn, which was this post which came from someone who I respect, good guy, and he basically said that homes or physical homes, physical properties on their own is not enough to end homelessness. You need community, and although I probably agree, I think with 90% of that, there's something in it which I don't agree with. And so since then, there's this guy called Simon Dwight who now lives in America, but he kind of cut his teeth in British homeless services. He used to work in King's Arms Project in Bedford when I worked there. So he kind of has written a number of articles, but this one here, in fact, I'll just show it up on the screen just to show you what it looks like. And then I've got a Word document with it in there just because I've highlighted a few bits that I certainly was kind of noted. So let me just get the screen up here so you can see what I'm looking at. So this is I'll put the link in the live chat as well and the description of the video for those watching afterwards. But it's on Stanford Social Innovation Review, which sounds very fancy. I assume it's connected to Stanford University. And so it's community beyond resources. This is what it looks like. As I say, I'm going to get the text of it in a minute just to kind of kind of go into it in a bit more detail. I don't know how many words this is, probably 1,000 words or something like that. So it's kind of it's saying some kind of headlines, but it's not going into a huge amount of detail. So that's what we're looking at. And if I won't share the screen in my Word document because I might do actually, because I'll just show you the bits that I'm homing in on. And so yeah, Clara and Shannon, if you want to just kind of pipe in and note anything, but if I just start us off with something which I think will get us talking, and then we'll kind of build up from there. So if I just get this one here, bear with me. So yeah, this is the text here. So it's the same text as the article I just showed, but obviously I can't highlight a website, so I've just done like this. So this is Simon talking. I've come to understand that people don't simply use services, as in homelessness services. They interpret, resist, and are shaped by them in deeply relational ways. Emotional overwhelm, peer influence, and human connection shape their engagement with services in a way which determine how ultimately successful they can be. As a result, building stronger pathways out of homelessness means prioritizing not only shelter, but also belonging. And so this is one of the paragraphs which I agree 100% with, I think. And it's interesting, I think, just to hear him talk about interaction with homelessness services on a deeper level than you'll usually get from charities. I mean, he's mostly talking about charities. In terms of just saying stuff a little bit about Simon Dwight as a background, after working in Bedford Services, he went to work for what was DLUC then, so the Ministry of Housing, it's MHCLG now. And I think if I might be getting this wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was a specialist advisor around faith, community groups, and homelessness. So his remit was kind of trying to engage and try and work with faith-based charities, often soup runs, severe weather emergency protocol type places, night shelters, that sort of thing. to try and get them singing from one hymn sheet to some level, because obviously there's a broad, wide range of services out there that are run by churches, varying levels of quality, varying levels of support and money that's involved, that sort of thing. And I guess his job was to try and kind of move them towards what the Ministry of whatever it was, Department of Communities, Local Government, Housing, and whatever it was, what they're actually after. Which is like herding cats, basically, because what you'll find straight away in any homeless charity is that we're very territorial, and we don't tend to be too generous towards other charities. So we kind of think ours is the best. I'm just talking for myself here, and everyone else is rubbish. Not I'm kind of being clumsy there, but so yeah, but I just thought it's interesting to kind of look at how there's just more to it. So people don't just come to a soup kitchen to get a bit of soup. They come for other reasons. There's lots of things going on there. It reminded me of I'll stop talking in a minute, but it reminded me of a soup kitchen in Bedford. The King's Arms Project ran a soup kitchen for decades. I think it still does, actually. But there was this other one that popped up maybe 8 years ago. And there were some things about it which were a bit dodgy, to be honest. Well-meaning, but dodgy. You had kids and stuff like running around there. In amongst a load of chaos, kind of some very intoxicated people and so on. So there's some concerns about it. And I went there, and I remember, trying to helping out. Whatever. I remember being given a stack of pizzas, like frozen pizzas, to give out to people, and I was told, only give one out each. And immediately people were just taking a piss, basically, taking two or three. And it wasn't because I think they were bad people. I just think there was something about that kind of like humiliation that people have when you've got someone, some well-meaning white, volunteer middle-class guy coming around giving out pizzas, which they would just piss them off. And so I think that kind of just taking the piss a little bit was a way of potentially responding to that but that natural humiliation you get by going to a sort of charity sort of place like that. So as I say, that's my start for 10. That's a bit that just popped out there. I think there'd be I don't know if he's written more about this kind of stuff, but I'd be interested to see if he has. But I don't know if that's something that kind of resonate with you guys, or whether you just want to move on to another paragraph, if there's anything that kind of pops out here. If not, we'll just we'll keep going. Or go on, Shannon.
Yeah, well, I think I am sort of moving you on to the next paragraph because it's to do with that first one and the next highlighted bit, which is when services become someone's whole world, it can make it harder for them to connect beyond that space. Countless times I've seen someone thrive in a supportive program until it ends and they're left isolated again. And I think, I think for me, that it sort of ignores the institutionalization that lots of homelessness services create. It's not I don't feel like it's on the person that's what happens. I feel like it's on the services that we create those spaces that because we tell people that they're, and I'm not saying we do this explicitly, of course, and I'm not saying we necessarily do this out of any malice either, but we essentially tell people that they can't survive without these services and they need these services. And, sometimes it goes as far as, you're bad if you no longer need this service. And, I think we institutionalize people and then we throw them into the deep end, as it were, and go, why are you struggling? And we're surprised by that. So I really like the point. I just feel like it doesn't perhaps go far enough. And I think I felt that through most of the article, and most of the points are sort of raised throughout this is it's not that I necessarily disagree, but I'm like, oh, just go further. And I think there's a difficulty there, and I wonder who the audience of this article is, perhaps.
Yep.
But I think that links in with the beginning bit as well about belonging, and talking about how the stronger pathway out of homelessness is to do with belonging. Well, again, you're sort of inadvertently talking about institutionalizing people to those services to create a stronger pathway out of that, which I feel he then sort of goes against later on in the article. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that sort of second highlighted point.
Yeah, I mean, my sense of like what I don't know him well enough. I had a couple of conversations with him over the years, so I'm not saying that I'm not psychic or anything, but I think that that DLUC in general were like really kind of I think they thought they were treading on eggshells probably more than they were. They didn't want to kind of say too much to charities because they were scared that they would disengage, and I think that meant they actually fell short of maybe saying things kind of more assertively. That would be my take on it. I don't know if I'm right there, but as I say, I mean, I don't know if it's viable to get Simon on at some point. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, he could obviously kind of give his opinion on that sort of thing. But yeah, okay, that's cool. I say we can kind of scan through the bits I've highlighted. If you guys see anything else at all, then we'll just kind of come to that. So yeah, just to say, guys, again, for those who came a bit late, we're not taking questions tonight. This is like I don't know what to call it really. It's just us talking about stuff which interest about homelessness services and so on in the sector. So if you've got questions about the law, how you can get housed, what the law is or whatever, come back tomorrow at 7:30 and we'll be doing the usual weekly live stream. So, and just as say as well, guys, as always, please don't put personal data in the live chat. So don't ask questions about yourself because it obviously identifies yourself. There's no need to do that. You can get the same answer elsewhere. So yeah, so yeah, as I say, we're not going to do this to death, but just kind of a few other bits that popped out. This is an interesting point. So King's Arms Project, as an example here, they run this pre-tenancy course, which as on the face of it, I just get really annoyed about. And the reason that might seem like a bit of a weird one. So it's like a course where I think there's like 6 parts. And there'd be a week on like basic house maintenance, how to put up a curtain rail, which is that's genuinely useful. Things like budgeting, which I always struggle with because I think people are much better at budgeting than charities will actually accept, and it's actually it's because the cost of living is so much is why people kind of don't manage to make ends meet rather than their own bad budgeting. But the point he's making here, I think, really does stand. So it's not so much. It's not necessarily about the content. It's not about cooking. It's not about coming to do a cooking and learning how to cook. It's about just being with people, not in a homeless setting or explicit homeless setting, and kind of making friendships and kind of get embedded into a bit of community that way. So I think that's. I'll kind of I think that point's really cool. Again, just interrupt me, guys, if you've got bits to say about this. The bit that kind of, I think, when I first read this, the bit that sort of stood out here, and this is maybe where I don't agree with Simon as so much, is this kind of thing, which again, he mentions his work at the King's Arms Project in Bedford, where they'd have like, so he worked in a supported accommodation provider rather than a night shelter, although there was a night shelter there as well. And so they would do things, hiking, film clubs and trips to the driving range. There's within this, and again, I'm bringing in some stuff here which Simon isn't saying, so I'm kind of getting triggered a bit by just my experience of working for the King's Arms Project, because it's a deeply religious organisation, which I don't think is or I think it can do a lot of damage. But I noticed that the kind of the activities that the professionals thought were good activities, hiking, film clubs and trips, golf basically, they're all like, well, 2 of them are specifically kind of middle class occupations. And I think there's this kind of danger when you have, let's use a Christian organization as an example, where the expectations and kind of the rules of the Christians, the church and so on they can definitely get put onto the people accessing the service. I've talked with many people over the years where they're kind of to the point where they're kind of made to pray and stuff like that. Really kind of bad stuff. But there's that kind of like that. There's that thing that professionals have where they think unless these homeless people act like us and do the things that we do, then they're not recovering. They're not kind of doing well. They're not kind of contributing to society or whatever. Which just something about that just grates. And again, I might be being tremendously unfair to him here, but I think the thing which I disagree as a whole article is that I question whether professionals can make a community, whether they can actually, whether they can have this sort of top-down sort of, they can make a community happen, or whether community is just something that happens anyway with anyone where you get humans together. And actually, I don't know, I'm not quite sure what the role is of professional organizations in making that. I don't know. That's a question I don't really have an answer to, but that's kind of what it made me think about. You've both unmuted, so
you
go for Clara.
Okay. I was just thinking like about the connection thing. It is a bit about like it's almost a fake connection if it's with well, I feel like homeless people can connect with other people just like anyone else can. Like they connect with each other and whoever else that they like. I don't think you can. I just think it's a bit fake to almost, for a member of staff to befriend them. And it's like, you might be that person's cup of tea, but you might not be. So I'm not really sure how that would work. Like, I just feel like anybody else and like those that aren't homeless, we go and find the people that we connect to, like each other. So it should be the same, surely. And I think it would be it would be much more beneficial just to connect to something they're passionate about and have a sense of purpose, which they, instead of making, taking them hiking, okay, fair enough, maybe somebody will go hiking and really like it, but surely it should be about helping them find that something that they're passionate about. And if they do, then that's going to make it easier to integrate into the community, because then you find the community of other people that are passionate about that. And then also the employment bit, and the article, it said something about helping them find work in a coffee shop or volunteering. And again, I feel like it doesn't give them much agency. Like, shouldn't they have a choice about where they would like to work, not just a coffee shop, or not be grateful because they've been given a role in a coffee shop, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think go back to the first thing you said there, like, and I'm talking, again, I'm talking for myself, but I don't think it just applies to myself. When I worked in the night shelter, I kind of, you get to know people really well. You kind of enjoy the company, but you can't. I don't think you can be friends in the way that an ordinary friendship would be, because you're paid to be there, and ultimately, that's the bottom line. So I think, as I said, I think that kind of gets to another why I think that charities can't, or they've got a real kind of challenge to actually find out how to do this well, because certainly as a worker, I had no insight into that power dynamic that existed between me and the people I was working with, because in theory I could bar them at middle of the night or something over something stupid, and I just didn't see it. And so I don't kind of those kind of those relationships I had, it goes back to that kind of, that one of the first things that Simon said in the article about people don't just kind of use services, they interact on a number of different levels, they resist it, so on. I think that kind of brought it on. So Shannon.
Yeah, I think the intervention thing is really odd, because I do agree that, like, people should find community, make friends, all of that, like, get into hobbies. Like, hobbies are, I think, so underrated as a thing. Like, I think people need hobbies. But it's not even necessarily the middle classness of those hobbies that he talks about, which I also do agree is a slight problem, in terms of, if you're talking about longevity, something like golf becomes very expensive. So you're completely ignoring the fact that, again, once that person is outside of that 6 weeks intervention scheme or whatever, that if they really do love it, how are they going to afford to get there? How are they going to afford the clubs? How are they going to afford the cost of going on the round of golf? You can tell I'm not into golf, but I know it is expensive. And vice versa. Like, even something like hiking, which people go, oh, it's free, but, like, okay, but you need decent shoes. You potentially need walking poles. You need to get to the place. You need to have a picnic or some form of flask. All of these things are expensive. And I think they add up. And I think my big thing with the interventions is, I would be surprised, and obviously I am reading into this, it's not explicitly said in the article, but if those King's Arms project interventions, and it's not specific to King's Arms, but if they were without a staff member, in which case I don't understand how the individuals in that group setting are supposed to be autonomous and create friends when they have a staff member next to them, or it's very, very obvious that they're in a school trip sort of like field day outing, because those individuals that are attending will be aware of that. You're aware that you've got a staff member with a lanyard or potentially with uniform or whatever, and people go, oh, why are they here? And it's not that people are judging necessarily badly, and it's not necessarily that it is, a huge barrier for other people, but you're then being labelled as the homeless person trying out golf, rather than a 36-year-old man who wants to try out golf with a couple of friends. Like, it's a very different sort of introduction to that community. And so I think, whilst those interventions are good, we should be trusting adults a little bit more and going, here's some money, here's a taxi, or here's a bus, or whatever, here's all the logistics done, go do the thing. Let us know how you found it afterwards, and we can either rearrange it, or if it's not for you, brilliant, let's do something different. Let's see what you did like out of it and work out, oh, you really liked being outside. but you hated the arm ache after swinging a club. Again, I don't play golf. But do you know what I mean? Like, there are those things that you can then pick out and go, right, this hobby might be a better fit for you or whatever. But I think that needs to be without the professional. And I think part of that is like what you were saying, Mike, around the power dynamics. And I think it's difficult because lots of professionals in the sector want to remove that them and us. And I actually think there's more power in acknowledging that there's a them and us, accepting that and working within that framework, rather than trying to be like, oh no, like there's no differentiation here. Like, there absolutely is. We shouldn't ignore that.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen an example of like it being done well? Like, I mean, I know you've done some work with Emmaus over the years, Shannon. I don't know if you've seen them, because I mean, that I remember like going to football tournaments with Emmaus. That was really cool. You know, generally like you'd have your own team, and people, there wasn't that kind of like, you wouldn't know who was staff and who wasn't, sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know if you've seen it done. Yeah, done kind of better than golf.
I mean, so I think Emmaus is really difficult because for those who don't know, it's supported accommodation, but you work and live there. And so staff members, the lines are very, very blurred in Emmaus. And I think sometimes that's a real benefit. And it does lead to like meaningful relationships and friendships and whatever, which arguably is potentially inappropriate if you take a sort of more boundaried approach to this sort of thing. But sometimes it is really negative as well, because you can't then have an argument with someone who is your worker and can kick you out. But you sort of don't realise that because you're palling around with them on the football pitch. I think it is really difficult. I think where I've seen community built well is outside of the specific sector. So look, I, just to put it out there, I'm extremely biased. I work for Expert Link. But I would say the spaces that Expert Link create around co-production and lived experience, I think often there's genuine community there, in terms of like people make friends outside of that. And again, not everyone, because not everyone will mesh with everyone, as in everything in life. You're not always going to find your people, but people have found their people and they've gone for a drink after work or whatever and met up out of their own accord. And I think whether that's because the space is sort of exclusively about power, I don't know. But that's, I think, perhaps somewhere where I've seen it work well in the sector, but not in the sector, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I would I think that's because I've seen two environments where something like that's been achieved. One is with Expert Link, and I don't work for Expert Link, but I'm still biased, I guess, because I think they had fantastic work. And another one was like a kind of a camp done actually kind of in relation to the King's Arms project, but it was kind of really, again, it was just very, very not like a service. But the co-production stuff, I think, services can do that, and actually that kind of those spaces where you're designing things, where you're planning things, where you're delivering on things together, that's where you do remove that kind of us and them to some level. If you still live in there, I get what you said before about kind of they can evict you whatever at any point, but I think if you're moving past that, I think that is just the only way I've seen it of actually kind of making it work. Hey, right, Martin. Yeah, we're not doing the usual one tonight, so we're just doing just kind of chatting really. We've got a little loose agenda here. So yeah, I think there's maybe one or two little highlighted bits left on this article, which I'll come to, and then we'll move to the next agenda item. So this one here again. So this is Simon kind of talking about. I guess again, he hasn't got space to kind of really go into detail about this. I'd be interested to see what this is based on and kind of what else is happening here. But so he says one man explained that he stopped attending a support group because he didn't want to ask for a lift, as he was just starting to feel normally feared, being seen as a charity case. And again, kind of this mention of dignity, and I think within all, a lot of the stuff I've read over the years, I mentioned this to Clara and Shannon before the live stream tonight. A lot of the stuff around this, where you're trying to get feedback, for want of a better word, from people using services, it's actually very difficult to really kind of get the depth of what's really going on, because that person might not be in a position to actually put it into words. So I doubt this. Well, this person didn't say, "Oh yeah, it's a bit humiliating to ask for a lift." Kind of in those sort of words. So I think kind of mentioning shame and mentioning humiliation is something which, as humans, we're just not very good at. There's reasons for that, which are quite interesting, but I won't go into it now. But I think that kind of we talk about sort of power dynamics. We talk about the effects of that. ultimately there is something deeply humiliating about queuing up for a soup kitchen, and it's not something I don't think really people talk about, or people designing services talk about enough. Kind of ways of kind of getting away from that humiliation. So, as I say, that's just something that's kind of popped out to me, and I think that might even be the last bit I highlighted. Yeah, is so. Yeah, so as I say, we're not going to do it to death, but I don't know if there's any final thoughts you guys have got about the article. I mean, as I say, let me put it into the I haven't put it into live chat yet, and as I say, I'll put it into the description of the video afterwards as well. So just to go give it context of what we're saying. But yeah, go on, Shannon.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of other bits that when I saw it, I sort of highlighted, which was the sentence is not about sympathy but solidarity.
Let me find it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so this whole like don't focus, and then I think towards the end it says, yeah, it's not about sympathy but solidarity. But for me, that whole paragraph around sympathy isn't actually talking about solidarity because there's no action. And so saying like, oh, it's about solidarity, and again, I'm really conscious, like Simon's done some brilliant work, and I think he's a really interesting guy, and it'd be cool to have him on actually. But I think the nuances around that is there needs to be that action. There needs to, standing with someone, being that having that solidarity, it is action based. It is not, and I don't think he necessarily goes again far enough into what people should be doing or that sort of like framing. And then again, I think towards the end, there's a sentence that like, what if instead of designing special systems for people on the margins, trying to find it on your screen. Yeah, there we go.
This one here.
Note above it. Yeah. I think I really like that because it's focusing on the barriers. It's like pushing people out and what have you. I think again, and I'm really conscious that this is a small article. He probably had a word limit and whatnot. It just doesn't go far enough to highlight and explain like what causes this. So like it's the gatekeeping. It's the lack of human rights. It's the treating people like they're only a homeless person and not every other experience they've had in their life. It's treating people like a number. It's like what Clara was saying about, that gratefulness as well, I think is a massive, massive thing. And so I think it's great to talk about removing the barriers, but actually I would wonder if we were to ask, what are the barriers that pushes people out of mainstream sort of society, I don't think any of those things would be discussed. And I think that's my concern with that point. But I do like it. Like, I do think it's a great point.
That kind of makes me want to invite Simon on more than just to hear what he's got to say about that. Because I think, I mean, for me, this kind of gets this kind of why this resonates with me, or why this kind of makes me think is that, and I've talked about this elsewhere many times probably, so I forgive the repetition, but when I started working in the sector, I thought homelessness was just caused by people's problems, drug and alcohol use and mental health issues and so on. And now I see it as entirely the opposite. So it's a civil rights issue where a large proportion of the society are systematically denied their rights in various ways, and that's what essentially underpins homelessness. And so, yeah, I'd be that'd be the first question I think I'd want to ask him is, what would he see the barriers are, and how radical do you need to be to remove them? That kind of idea of solidarity, kind of a bit further up. For me, and I don't know if this kind of contradicts what I've said to some level, but when I worked at Just Us in Bedford, where we would just basically stick with someone until we won the argument with the council and got them housed, that for me had far more therapeutic value, for want of a better word, than being nice to them, giving them cups of teas and chatting. That act of just saying, and I'm not saying we were cold. We weren't cold. We'd be nice. We'd be friendly and kind of try and put people at ease. But we would only do whatever it was that needed to get them housed. We wouldn't kind of spend time with people like just kind of willy nilly. Really, we would just get the job done. Sometimes we'd only meet people once, really, and then it would just be kind of email contacts and phone calls and so on. So I think that was a real kind of like difference from when I worked at the night shelter, when we kind of thought, it's all about spending time with people and being really super duper nice. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that last point as well about like I think we'd perhaps both agree, like there are so many organizations and posts and forums and everything else. It's like, we need a creative way to end homelessness. We need to put more funding into this area, and we need to create something different for, you know, homeless people with substance misuse or homeless people with mental health, and we need to put more money in here. And so I really like that last point, because it's like, no, let's just focus on what's, like, there's already things in place. And
Yep.
I think that really aligns with what we say around sort of homelessness law. Like, you know, the law is actually banging as it is. You can keep trying to add different bits of law and whatnot, and maybe that is a good thing, maybe it's not. But when you look at the unintended consequences of that, you'd probably have a greater effect by just using what's already in place. And like you're saying, removing those barriers. But yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, it may be there's something we'll return to this again. As I say, I might reach out to Simon. He's in America, so we'll have to work out the time difference and so on, but see if he's interested in coming talking about it. So our next agenda point comes from a LinkedIn post that Shannon picked up on. Let me just get the right one. Is the right one here? So yeah, so the post was called Hierarchies of Lived Experience. So Shannon, given that you're the one who'd noticed this, do you want to just kind of talk us through it a little bit to start us off?
Yeah, I can try. I so
just sorry, just say that Shannon didn't write this. Shannon just saw it. So I don't even remember who it was that wrote it. Just to make that point.
Yeah, no, I didn't write it. And for those who don't know, like, I've got my own lived experience of homelessness and multiple disadvantage and work within co-production, so I found it really interesting. And the article is sort of making the point that there are kind of these hierarchies of people who get involved with co-production, and I think we'll all be sort of aware of, you know, various organizations that tend to use the same 1, 2, 3 people for their good news stories, their promotional social media posts, whatever it might be. And, you know, often they are more polished. They might do interviews promoting the organization, or whatever it might be. And then it's sort of talking about a different side of co-production and lived experience that's more rough and ready. I think it says messy in the article, and it's basically, I found it was suggesting that we need to challenge the polished side of co-production and lived experience, which is something I find interesting. And again, I'm not sure where I sit on this, and I think without being too like on the fence, I think we need a mixture of everything. I think co-production is about including people who want to be included and want to have their voices heard. It's not about forcing people. And I think one of the things about people who are complex, emotional, and messy, and I'm not saying people are, but like lived experience, as the point is making in the article, I think when we're talking about that trauma-informed stuff that we sort of chatted a little bit before the live stream went live, lots of those people don't want to share their lived experience. They don't want to take part in fixing the system because they don't want to do that at that point. And I think it's very, again, I'm mincing my words a bit, but it's easy to go, oh, we're bad professionals for only engaging with people who are polished and show up to be the best they can be, and we don't engage with the people calling us names and, you know, whatever. And I think there is definitely more effort needed to show everyone, and I'm talking about staff as well, to be honest, why co-production works, why lived experience is so vital and important. But I think it would be a mistake to also push that on people, and to ignore people just because they're in a different part of their journey. Because I think the beauty of lived experience is that you can have people who are in the experience currently. You can have people who are 2 years out of it. You can have people who are 15 years out of it. And everyone's got a different perspective, and they'll have different learned experiences then to bring into it. So yeah, I think I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, because like I said, I am not one way or the other on this.
I think it's I think it's a question of how you make sure you're getting the different kind of perspectives in it, because I think, you know, calling something, you know, say having a co-production program which involves, you know, turning up like once a month to some office in a different town or something, and kind of, you know, meeting and speaking for 3 hours and coming up with an action plan. That's a valuable thing to do, but that if that's all you're doing, you're not going to get people who are, you know, currently using drugs or whatever, and they're kind of having to go and score and stuff just to kind of get through the day. But you still need to be getting the perspectives of the people in that situation. And so the question, I think, is more about, you know, how do you make sure that happens? I don't think that co-production has to be getting the most kind of, you know, the person who's at the highest crisis speaking in a conference or something and telling people, you know, how to do things better, which I think is kind of, I'm not sure if that's what this person's trying to say. I think it probably isn't what the person's trying to say, but I think that's the kind of the fetishization of homelessness you get, where you kind of get the people with the, you know, who use the most drugs to be the only ones who have a voice. And actually, my time working at the night shelter, there was such a variation of people, backgrounds kind of living there. And it would have been a mistake just to kind of listen to the loudest ones who, like, you know, maybe their behavior was the most difficult, because actually there were more people who were just kind of quietly suffering and had plenty to say. And it was a question of how do you bring those voices out? And the answer is, I think the answer is you have to do it in a million different ways. You need to kind of, you know, it has to be kind of just really relational based, and kind of just find what people have to say back into the service at some level, and creating those opportunities where you're trying to avoid those kind of intimidating settings and that sort of thing, for sure. But I think I think the nature of people is that you're going to have people who can pass as more middle class, who are going to be the ones who end up, you know, kind of having you probably kind of driving the change. That would be, maybe that's wrong, maybe I'm just oversimplifying it, but I think that's what you're likely going to get. And I think that's just the way humans work. I just think it's very difficult to, if you've got a council or a charity who's starting to co-produce their work, then there's going to be all sorts of fears coming from professionals that you have to kind of get around. And I'd say probably the best way to approach it isn't just to send them the most kind of in crisis people and kind of put them in a room together. I think that's kind of no good for anyone.
And I think that's where training comes in. So, like, I think so many organizations and places do co-production or lived experience engagement, and they don't train people with lived experience. And so I think sometimes I wonder if that's what this person is talking about, that actually they've got a group of people who are able to articulate, and it's not down to even class or whatever, it's down to the organization preparing them. So again, talking about Expert Link, but we do a lot of training for our members, and we spend a lot of time, again, not even like in a patronizing way either, because I know like the members and what they need or what works best for them and their learning styles, but like translating some 120-page policy paper and being like, right, what are you guys interested in out of this, and doing that sort of legwork. And so then you have a meeting, and it can look like, oh, what a polished group or whatever, and actually it's ignoring the masking that happens with a lot of these things as well. And I think perhaps I'm sliding into a different conversation here, but even the perhaps more middle class people with lived experience who are engaged in this sort of stuff, I think most of that is probably masking. It's, you know, they've still had that lived experience. And I think sometimes people would be surprised if you go, actually, what is your lived experience? Because you're talking about a very specific thing in a meeting. You're not necessarily sharing every aspect of your story, because you don't need to, because that's then trauma dumping. And so then what you're talking about is that rough and readiness of co-production is actually not co-production, in my opinion, because it's just trauma dumping. It's not people telling their story in a protective way. And so I think sometimes the point maybe then ignores that actually what you've got is just a trained group of people with lived experience that know that they're safe to share some parts of their story, and they don't have to share every dark, horrible thing about their lived experience in order to make change and in order to get their voices heard. And so I think, yeah, that's what I think.
So, I mean, what you're saying there just made me remind me of the times you were telling about, you know, kind of when you've got a meeting with DWP or someone, and you've kind of got a group of people who've been homeless or using, kind of using the DWP services, and it's important just that you're kind of prepping people to understand how to make the best use of time. And actually, if you don't do that, then people get in there and they haven't got a plan, and they kind of, end up kind of missing opportunities that they probably kick themselves for later. So yeah. Clara, you got anything on this one?
Yeah. So I was thinking about it today, and I think for me, it's about a combination of helping the complex, messy people, helping them articulate their words, but it's also crucial having professionals who can recognize the trauma. Because like we were discussing earlier about the trauma informed, often they are experiencing trauma, but they can't put it into words. So like an example for me is like sitting in a waiting room can be really difficult for some people that have had a lot of trauma, and all what they know is that they are really struggling to sit there. But if you ask them why they were struggling to sit there, they probably couldn't tell you, apart from that all they had is a strong feeling to leave. So it's about helping people say like, so I looked this one up. So it's like a loss of control from not knowing what is happening, which echoes feelings of powerlessness, anxiety and hypervigilance about uncertain situation, disrespect of time. So weights can feel invalidating, reinforcing feelings of being unseen and unimportant. So all those feelings are probably could be the feelings underneath, but they're not going to be able to say that. So for me, I'm quite passionate about teaching people, helping people understand what's going on for them so they can articulate it to professionals, as well as from the other side, making sure that the professionals are looking at the behavior, not just the person. Because I was thinking like the messy and complex people, a lot of it is you can understand why they wouldn't be included, because, and I don't think it's that people are trying to be cruel and exclude them, but people are often fearful, aren't they? Like if you see someone very distressed and emotional, if you're not trained or you can't separate the person from the behavior, your fearful reaction might just be like, I need to get away from this person as fast as I can. And that might be someone's reaction, or someone else's reaction will be, you know, pulling out the abuse card saying, we do not tolerate abuse, security remove you. Which again is, you know, nobody should tolerate abuse, but at the same time, if they looked at the behavior, so yeah, for me, I think it would be empowering if, like, even if somebody's going to do say someone turns up at the council, a single male who is vulnerable, but as we know, often get gate kept, that if we could teach them just basic things like, say, if they get told no chance, we're not helping you, just say, okay, can I have that on a section 184 letter, please? Just like very small things that can then empower them, that is fairly easy to remember. And then I think you can almost bridge the gap between the professional, because I think if you say to a professional, I don't know, I can't stay in here because drinking's my only coping strategy, and right now that's being taken away from me, I think a professional is much more likely to be more empathetic rather than so for me it's about both sides.
Yeah, I think it's probably actually the harder thing is to train professionals, or to make sure every professional in those kind of settings aren't just going to be horrible and kind of make things worse. I'm not a neuroscientist, obviously. If there's anyone watching this live stream who knows more about this than I do, then please put it in the comments or whatever, just to kind of fill in some gaps of knowledge. But my understanding about EMDR, the I can't remember what it stands for now, eye movement something or other. It seems like kooky, but it's actually research-based kind of therapy for trauma, and apparently, if I understand this correctly, a psychiatrist told me this a few years ago, so I might have misremembered it, but effectively, when you're traumatized, your brain's ability to kind of bring in language, you know, the language part of your brain or whatever, is basically cut off from other parts of you, and so literally you can't find the words to kind of say what you're feeling. And what EMDR does is basically somehow with the eye movement stuff reconnects the language part of your brain to actually enable. So it is literally a case of that person literally cannot say what it is they're actually feeling at that point, because their brain is not functioning like a you know, a healthy brain that hasn't been traumatized. So I think I find that stuff fascinating. I don't know a huge amount of it. That's basically it. But I think that kind of that kind of, if that is so prevalent in the sector, which I'm sure we think, we believe it is, the question is how do you make sure that housing officers, any professional really, isn't just trampling all over someone's emotions because just for ignorance or whatever, just they don't want to know. I think we said this before, you know, it's very difficult to make housing officers be decent and kind of trauma informed. I think all you can probably do is actually just give them things that they shouldn't do, and that's probably the best you can hope for with some officers, because they're just not going to get it. I mean, I've seen some housing officers who regard themselves as being trauma informed. They just look at what they're doing. I'm like, you've lost the plot. So yeah.
Can I just come in on a point Clara made there? Because it reminded me of, and someone said it way more like articulate than I will, but like you can't win as a client in terms of that communication. So if you then had that person who's like, oh, do you mind giving me it in a Section 184 letter? The housing, like, you're going to be too articulate then. So you're either going to be too like chaotic and hard to engage with and everything else, or you're too polished and you're too whatever. And actually, that going back to that article, I think that's my issue with it, is like you're talking about co-production, but you're basically saying people can't win either way. Like, you're either too polished or you're too rough and ready. And I think I don't know what my point is, but I think just to highlight that, like, if professionals aren't that trauma informed, and I think it is really interesting because lots of places that shout from the rooftops that they're trauma informed, I would be like, what? And then there's organizations that don't even mention the word trauma informed, and you're like, wow, you guys just get it, like, you just do it, you don't need to be shouting about it. But I do think, that whole, like, you can't win, you're either too polished or you're, you know, too chaotic to be listened to, or don't know what you're talking about.
So I mean, a little bit of history, and obviously I don't know the full history of it, but so the idea of trauma informed stuff came, and I might be wrong about this, obviously it had roots going back further than this, but I think back in like 2005, I think it was Homeless Link. I might be totally wrong about that as well, but they basically did some pilots where they had some, like, you know, very, very skilled professionals providing therapy to people living in hostels. So you had, I mean, Nick Maguire was involved from Southampton Uni. He's quality. You had I've forgotten her name now, actually. You had Dean Whittington, who I think then fell out with everyone about it, and kind of, you know, he wrote some really cool books, which for me was the kind of start of the journey of it, really. But they were kind of that, they were highly skilled practitioners, and they were delivering trauma informed, what we now call trauma informed. I mean, initially this is where psychologically informed environments came out of this bit of work, which then kind of morphed into trauma informed stuff. But as I say, I'm sure there was plenty of other people, you know, kind of who pushed the agenda and whatever. But it came from that kind of, you know, if you read some of those books, you know, you read Nick Maguire, or you read Dean Whittington on it. These are people steeped in theory. They're kind of, it's very, very well thought out and deeply thought out. And then you hear, like, I remember hearing like local charity called Impact saying they're trauma informed because they had like an interior designer come and repaint their hostel, and it's like, that is, it's Homelessness Estate has a tendency to do this, where they'll get a good idea like housing first, and they'll just basically dilute it to the point where it's now meaningless. And I think, I don't know if I said this before, but how you watch Shadow? For me, like, lived experience. So again, the history of lived experience, if I understand it correctly, is an interesting one, because it comes out of Jean-Paul Sartre, and probably therefore nicked from Simone de Beauvoir back in the 50s or 40s. So they were French existentialists, and they were talking about the lived experience as in how we use labels to kind of explain someone else's existence, and how, you know, lived, you know, kind of understanding that everyone has lived experience of whatever. And I think there's a danger with lived experience that it just does become another label, like, kind of, we actually lose the power of it. And so whereas we used to call, you know, the homeless and whatever, you know, and then we kind of morphed into something else, and now it's kind of lived experience. I think there's a real danger that the homelessness sector will dilute lived experience to a point where it doesn't mean anything anymore, or it doesn't mean what it was supposed to mean. And I think, you know, it's so infuriating when you see charities just basically, as you say, Shannon, like, you know, they say they're trauma informed or whatever, and then they're not. It's just, I don't know what you do about it, really, other than, you know, whinge about it, really. So,
well, I think there's an acknowledgement that needs to happen that isn't happening. So interestingly, I had a meeting this week talking about trauma informed practice, and someone put in the chat like the government definition, and like the 6 overarching principles, which is safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, empowerment, and cultural consideration. And the choice one's really interesting because it's saying that, you know, service users are supported in shared decision making, choice and goal setting to determine the plan by, and then it lists these things that's like that service users have all the choice in, but it doesn't acknowledge that there are those barriers in place. Like, it doesn't acknowledge that if you're going to the job centre, you do have a limited choice. And again, I think if you're going to be trauma informed, it's not about letting your clients have every single choice known to man, because that's not realistic. Like, that is not possible. You can't choose absolutely everything in life in any situation. But knowing which choices are important to people, hearing people when they say, I can't do that, and like Clara was saying, understanding the deeper meaning behind why they're struggling with something, perhaps, I think is really key. And I think we have to acknowledge our own limits and boundaries and whatever when it comes to this thing. And I think so many people in the sector, I say people, like organizations perhaps, but are scared of sort of saying, actually, no, we can't do that, because then they go, oh, we're awful for not being able to be flexible and adapt to whatever that person's saying. And like, actually, again, from my work with co-production and lived experience, like, people with lived experience care about the honesty. If you can't do something because of a financial reason, that's cool, own it, tell someone and explain it, and then the person's fine, because they go, yeah, no worries, like, yeah, you don't have an unlimited pot of money to do X, Y, and Z, and for me to choose that I want to attend an appointment at 9:13 p.m. of the evening. Like, I think that there's boundaries that we're not acknowledging, and I think we have to acknowledge that, not bias, but yeah, in order to then move forward.
Yeah. I wonder how it can, how we can kind of, I don't know, what can be done to kind of help services and help the sector actually get this right. Because I think the problem is that there's a huge amount, there's some financial incentives for kind of calling yourself trauma informed when you're clearly not, and there's, no one's really checking, none of the commissioners probably actually know what it means in the first place. So when you got like a service saying it's trauma informed for a funding application, the commissioners don't know enough to know otherwise. Same with Housing First. People call them organisations call themselves Housing First when they definitely don't adhere to the principles of Housing First. It's kind of, I don't know, what do you do other than just call it out? And I think that lack of authenticity, I think I've talked about elsewhere, Shannon, in terms of this tendency that services have to be inauthentic, and it's not just home to services. Half, it seems that half of Britain does it, where we're just not able to actually say honestly what the actual situation actually is. So I just explain what I'm talking about there a bit of a tangent. But my big bugbear with Bedford Borough Council at the moment is that because they won't admit that they used to gatekeep systematically, that has inhibited their ability to actually talk about, actually come up with problems, or to come up with solutions to the problems that the sector has, because they've effectively, by not being authentic and not being honest about all the things they've done wrong in the past, and due to some level now, they keep the other partners in the dark, and so no one's kind of working together. And I think, I don't know, it just seems that the kind of people who are happy lying about that sort of stuff and kind of saying they're trauma informed and they're not, unfortunately seem to have a habit of rising to the top of organizations too easily. And so you just get kind of dishonest, you see what a charity writes on its website about how good it is, and then you actually speak to people living there and you're like, this is just two different worlds. There's not even close. There's no reality at all to that, really. I think I think trauma informed stuff is something we can return to quite a lot. I just wonder if there's kind of, rather than trying to do it all in one go, try and just kind of make a couple of points each time we return to it. Probably a better way of doing it, because there's something which really matters. It kind of, we haven't actually said it explicitly, but things like gatekeeping very clearly have a trauma kind of impact on people. It's traumatic for people to have that response from a council when they just managed to get themselves motivated to go and try and get help. So has anyone got anything else to say? We're coming up to 8:30, so we've got a little bit of time.
That's quick. I just wanted to jump on that point about a housing manager who recently, after gatekeeping someone repeatedly, even from hospital, just a straight no, then when I raised the complaint, responded, copying in the housing member, our team are trained to be trauma informed and sensitive. And it's like everyone knew the story of what I'd been complaining about, and it was very clearly like anything but. And it was just, I just couldn't believe it. I didn't even respond to that bit, but yeah.
Councils, in my experience, councils' ability to say black is white, it's almost like Donald Trump's sort of levels of denial sometimes, where they're just saying the exact opposite of what everyone knows is the truth. And it's infuriating. A question I would love to return to in another live stream at some point is why are some people prepared to challenge councils and some people aren't? I'm talking really about kind of advocates and kind of professionals to some level there, rather than I get why people who are actually homeless don't want to challenge a council, but I'm just it's interesting. I mean, I think part of the challenge is having to deal with the emotional fallout of getting those kinds of responses. It's perverse. It's much less of an issue in Bedford now, but when me and John started out in 2014ish, some of the responses we'd have literally like the head of directorate would basically say Bedford Borough Council always follows the law, and this would be in relation to a complaint which they just upheld, where they just broke the law multiple times. But that kind of I guess it's like just the nature of the organisations that councils tend to be, where they're very hierarchical. They're just interested in PR. They're constantly fearful about what's this going to look like if we acknowledge this wrongdoing. I mean, the data breach case I've recently got kind of finally ended in a positive way has so many examples of just where Bedford Borough Council just basically lied about the fact that they hadn't broken the law when they knew they'd actually disregarded their own legal advice, which is all in writing. It's crazy how, I don't know, we should probably do a whole live stream about how do housing officers, or how do people work for councils say that kind of stuff and think it's all right? I don't know. It's a fascinating question.
I agree. I think that should definitely go on the list of topics. And I know, like I've said this to you before, Mike, and perhaps this is my non-normal brain sort of not understanding this, so apologies. But I don't understand why a service wouldn't want to improve, because improvement looks good. Improvement can be shouted about. Like I'm gonna be really hyperbolic here. I can't think of anything worse. Obviously, I can. There's really horrible, dark stuff happening on in the world, but of like being, oh, we never ever break the law. We do everything perfectly, because there's no up from there. There's absolutely no improvement from there. Whereas if you had a local authority that was like, oh no, we do struggle with X, Y, and Z. We struggle with gatekeeping around local connection because we have lots of people coming from out of area. Then, like in a year, 2 years time, you've got, this is my graph chart, but you've got a oh, I'm so bad at maths, an increasing improvement that you can then shout about. You can go to funders and say, we're struggling with this. Can you give us extra money to tackle this so we can improve it? And I don't understand the lack of drive to improve services and to pretend that everything is 100% perfect, because that's not how, if that's not how individuals work, that can't be how systems work. Like, it's because the individuals are designing the systems, the individuals are part of the system. So if individuals always need to improve, and you can't tell me that Bedford Borough Council, every single one of their workers on their professional review, development, whatever, 6 monthly, 12 monthly, whatever, you can't tell me that there is no suggestions for improvement on any of those workers, and that everyone in their job at Bedford Borough Council is performing at 100%, because that's not human. That isn't human in my opinion. And again, this might be my weird brain, and it's probably quite problematic that I strive for 100%. But that improvement, I don't. Yeah.
I think this is like maybe one of the most important questions I need to figure out. I think the key is that the reason councils can generally get away with it is that it's the public don't believe it's happening. So you tell someone every day of the week someone's been denied housing unlawfully, or probably 100 people are probably. They just don't get it. And so because members of the public don't understand the injustice that kind of happens within homeless applications and everything else, homeless sector, then I think it just allows councils to get away with predict things, and so their official statement is we always follow the law. Most people would probably believe that and kind of dismiss the homeless person, say, oh yeah, they must be dishonest or whatever. And I think that's one of the problems which when we think about charities, you think, oh, they're just harmless, but actually when they're perpetuating these kinds of ideas of homelessness, they're essentially enabling homeless people to be blamed for the whole situation, when really very few people are responsible for their own homelessness. So yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know if it was actually a question, Shannon, but I think what I'd really like to see in Bedford is kind of what we've been doing, just building on it in terms of getting people who've been homeless going to engage with local democracy, going to housing committees and asking questions. And I think that's the only answer I could see to it, where they have to answer for the fact. So if they put a written statement saying we always follow the law, or we're trauma informed, then you can basically expose them and say, well, let's see a training program, let's FOI it and see what training staff actually get about around kind of trauma informed approaches and stuff, and just basically ask the question out loud. I think that's the key, is exposing it out loud, not exposing it in a kind of bad way, but just kind of saying this stuff out loud. I think in public, basically, it makes it more difficult for councils to get away with it. So yeah, I'll put it on the list of things to talk about in future.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you, and I also do think, Shannon, there's a bit of a culture thing with local authorities, where it's like you get a good pension, reasonable pay, you can just sort of go to I've worked in a local authority for 5 years, and it's just sort of like you can just get by, and you don't really have to have that desire to improve, and you can still get your pay, you can still get promoted. I'm not saying all local authorities have that. That was just my experience. And it's also the accountability thing, like Mike was saying, because like I've written to like the Director of Public Health and various other high people, and I get so far with them, and then they just maybe stop replying. And the reason why is because they can, like they don't have to, like even if you councillors, like, and that's why I think the questions probably is the best way forward, because they can't wiggle out of that one.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to name them, but I do on LinkedIn, which I've said before, it's kind of a depressing place, because it's like the worst place for like everyone saying everything's great all the time. But there is a council, let's say it's down south, that's about as specific as I'll be, but there's like the housing options manager, and he does appear to like just be honest, and he does seem to be like a decent guy actually. So, but I think that he stood out as kind of the exception rather than the rule, where they're just kind of saying, this is a real challenge, and kind of and again actually being open about kind of going back to central government and saying we haven't got enough money to follow the law here, rather than usually what happens is the message will be, oh, everything's fine, we're doing great, we don't need any more money. That's effectively what central government hear if you say that. So that kind of, and it goes back to why I've got less sympathy for housing officers than many people, because there's always an option to kick up a fuss and say we haven't got any money to do our job legally. They can always say that, and that is something that will then escalate the issue. All the time that they're just lying about it and stuff, it just means that it just never gets dealt with. So that's the hour, innit? We'll do this again at some point soon. Obviously, yeah, just kind of particularly school holidays makes it a bit tricky, but yeah, thanks for your time, guys. I as always, I find it really interesting. I think if we can continue to just kind of put stuff on the agenda and stuff to explore those things, is a good thing, even just for ourselves, if nothing else. Just to say, for those watching, the usual live stream will be on tomorrow night. So if you've got a question about the law, then ask tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. We'll be back with the usual one, but this was just like an impromptu one, which I squeezed in because we didn't do as one on Monday. And I want to do these more. I think kind of maybe inviting people like Simon Dwight, or figuring out how do we kind of actually go into a bit more detail with trauma informed kind of theory and stuff like that. I think that would all be very interesting stuff, so it'd be cool to find out a way of doing it. But yeah, thanks for watching tonight, guys, and if you're